Today is Monday, November 30th. Welcome to the Around the Academy podcast. My name is Corey Miller. I'll be your host. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope everyone's doing well. We hope you had a great Thanksgiving holiday. Thanksgiving obviously was a little different for a lot of people this year, but hopefully you're able to enjoy the holiday and the nice long break this year. This is our third episode. If you didn't already know, our first one was more of an introduction. The second one we did was geared more to GAPC Day, but this is our third episode, and this is kind of a special episode because this is when we begin our team segments, if you will. If you didn't already know, we're going to go team by team starting in the fall and really do all bunch of stuff with them segments, previews, and we're just going to make sure we incorporate them into the podcast. But we're going to be starting with the football team, as many of you already know. We're starting with them. And how we're going to do this is we figured we'd split it into two episodes. So this is going to be the first of two episodes we do on the football team. And today what we're going to do for the first episode on the football team is we're going to look at, it's going to be more of a history kind of breakdown of the football team and what things were like leading up to what the team is today. And then the next episode, episode 2 on the football team, episode 4 overall, will focus more on what the football team is like now. So some of the players on the team now, how they did this season, how they've done the past couple seasons, and we're really going to look at that from the standpoint of since Coach Dents took over, that was in 2012, what the team has looked like. But as we said today's going to be more of the history. We got a great episode planned. We're going to look at a timeline on GA football. Some of the great historic events that happened throughout its history, some of the great coaches and players that coached and played here, and we're also going to go over some of the top games in GA football history that we were able to come across that happened years and years ago, but they still had significant meaning. And then later on in the show, we're going to interview two of the GA football captains, Jeff Decker and Mike Moran, so we're really excited about that. Make sure you don't miss that. Both of those guys, really good defensive ends, among other positions on the GA football team. So make sure you tune in to that a little later on the show. We're looking forward to that. But with that being said, let's start in with some of the history on the GA football team. So the team itself is actually 140 years old, and that's a nice tradition. I think if you don't already know this, that Coach Dents has brought to the team is they refer to themselves each year by how old they are. So this year, this is Team 140, meaning that this is the 140th team, GA football team in the history of GA. So that means that the team itself dates all the way back to 1880. Unfortunately, the records we were able to come by really only give us detailed information starting in 1887. And as we talked about in our last episode, that's when the Interact was originally started and the first GAPC Day happened. But that's when most of the information dates to, even though the team is even older. That's when the information dates to, so we're going to really go from there. But just a bit of history and kind of just to show you how historic the football team is. Football is one of the most historic sports in Iraq and in the country. Keep in mind that they began playing football in high school before the NFL. GA football dates to the 1880s, and the oldest football rivalry dates to 1875. So you get a sense of how old, really, and how historic this football team is, and football in Iraq in general. It's incredibly historic. But let's jump in with some of the timeline and historic events. We mentioned we're going to start at 1887 because that's when we really get a sense of some of the records, and we don't really have much information before that. A lot of what were the facts and information that we're going to be talking about today we found on tedsillery.com. So if you're interested in any of those statistics, it's not just football, it's several other sports, basketball, lacrosse, some other sports as well. Check that website out, tedsillery.com. They have some really great information on the history of the Interact and some other Philadelphia area leagues like the Catholic League and other public leagues. But starting in 1887, as you mentioned, that's when the Interact started. The first head coach that we were able to identify in GA football history was a guy by the name of George Van Udese. He was the head coach in 1887. We mentioned this in our GAPC Day podcast, But GA originally, when football started to be played in 1887, it was just two sports. It was football and track being played in the Interac at the time. GA fielded some really, really strong football teams early on in its history. They won the first GAPCA game, which was played in 1887. They won that 20-6, as we mentioned. But they also won the Interac football title in its first year of existence. They went 4-0 overall, so they won their three other games besides GAPC Day. But it's not just 1887 they had a really good team. The first 13 years they were really successful. In its first 3 years, the team went 16-3-2. And then if you look at the first 13 years, so going all the way up to 1900, GA won 7 of the first 13 Interac championships. Now, obviously, the Interac looked a lot different back in 1900 and before, but winning 7 of the first 13 Interac championships, that's tied with Penn Charter for the most during that span. So you get a sense of how good the GA football team really was in those first about 13 years of their existence. They also did pretty well in the early 1900s. They won 3 more titles. They won in 1903, 1907, and 1908. And a common thread, really, for most of the 1800s, when the team started playing in the early 1900s, there wasn't really a coach who served there for any extended period of time. You have to go all the way up to 1926 to find the first GA coach who served a term longer than 5 years. That was Joe Hartley, who served from 1926 all the way to 1932. But before that, there was only one case of a 5-year coach. That was Nathan Stauffer. But other than that, it was mainly 1 to 2 years on every GA football coach, which is very interesting. But also during the early 1900s, after 1908, the team struggled a little bit. They didn't win any Interac championships, but that changed. You have to fast forward to 1933. That's when Cooper French took control of the team. He became, after Joe Hartley, the longest tenured football coach at the time. He served 10 years, 1935 to 1945. The team kind of restored some extended periods of success. They won, as we just said, in 1933. And then they also went on to win in 1938 and in 1940 under head coach Cooper French. And after that, they kind of went through another period of time. There were some definitely good teams, but they didn't win any Interac championships. That changed when Coach Ed Lawless took control of the team in 1952. One of the legendary GA football coaches in its history, has a career record of 51, 24, and 10. He has a Interac record of 26, 14, and 8, and he really helped the team gain an extended period of success. The team won 4 Interac titles under Lawless, which is the most of any GA football head coach in its history, the history of GA football. And the 1952 football team is one of the teams that has been inducted into the GA Sports Hall of Fame. They had a great season. They were undefeated. And Lawless, actually, at the end of his career, when he retired from GA football in 1960, he was the third winningest coach, and still is the third winningest coach in GA football history, again amassing a total of 51 wins. Now, as you just mentioned, Lawless retired in 1960. You had a few years in between where the team struggled a little bit. They only won 4 games total from 1961 to 1963 and didn't win a single game in the Interac. So you wanted to get back to prominence there. That happened in 1964 when Jack Turner became the head coach of the GA football team. He actually played under Ed Lawless. He was a 4-sport athlete at GA. And a common theme you're going to notice when we get to some of these great football athletes and athletes at GA that we talk about a little later on the show, a common theme with a lot of them is they played at least 3 sports, in some cases 4. I think there may even be a case of 5 sports being played. They did at GA, but Turner played 4 sports at GA. He played football, basketball, baseball, and track. He went on to play football at the University of Delaware, where he was a 2-time All-American. Little while after graduating from there, came back and coached football and baseball at GA in addition to being the athletic director. He's actually the all-time winningest coach in GA football history, coached for 22 years from 1964 to 1986. He amassed 103 wins over his career to go with 89 losses and 2 ties. His Interac record was 49, 59, and 1. So the 103 wins, the most in GA football history. He did win an Interac title with the team. The 1973 football team was that Interac champion. They went 10-0 and were ranked number 2 in the Philadelphia area. The team actually won 2 Interac titles under Turner. 1973 was one of them. And then after Turner, you had really some good stretches of coaching there. Right after Turner retired from the head coaching position and stepped down, the now late Bill Calm took over. Fortunately, he passed away a few weeks ago, and we were very saddened to hear about his death. But he took over immediately after Turner stepped down. He served 2 separate stints as the GA football coach, the first being from 1987 to 1993, and the second being 1995 to 2000. He's the second all-time winningest coach in GA football history, compiled an all-time record of 70, 49, and 5, and an Interac record of 22, 27, and 3. He won 1 Interac title during his 2 separate stints, and he was another one of those coaches. Just a very historic record at GA and a great career. And then, for the most part, that's kind of gets you. He retired in 2000. You had 2 coaches in between, Michael Turner and Luke Harris, and then you get to kind of where we are today. And the current coach, that's Coach Dentz. He took over in 2012. So far, he has an all-time record of 58, 31, and 1. And under him, the GA team won the 2016 Interac title. They shared that with Malvern Prep. Technically speaking, we're not yet sure how the Interac wants to handle this, but the GA football team, and we will get into this in our second episode on the football team, but they had a great season this year. They were 3-1. That was technically the best record in the Interac, so if you want to look at it from that standpoint, I know I do. They technically won the Interac again this year. But that's kind of a history of the football team, a timeline of it. Again, if you want more kind of all the coaches and their statistics and what the team did for several of these years, again, you can go on tedsillery.com, look at some of those amazing statistics, go all the way back to 1887. You have some really amazing stuff you can find there. What we wanted to do now is we wanted to talk about some of the amazing accomplishments that football players have achieved at GA. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about mainly offensive statistics because that's what we've been able to find, more specifically rushing, passing, and receiving statistics. We tried to find some defensive ones, but those were very hard to come by. But starting with rushing, there's been some great runners in the history of GA football. Starting in 1991, this is really when we've been able to find statistics, like individual player statistics about the GA football team. They go all the way back to 1991. That's kind of the earliest we really have prolonged information about many of the players in GA history. But going back to 1991, that's how we're looking at things now. There have been 7 members of the 1,000-yard rushing club, if that's what you want to call it. The first one, and this is single-season rushing, that is, Larry Leith. He was the first one to accomplish that, dating back to 1991. He actually did it in 1991. He ran for 1,016 yards on 164 carries. It comes out to 6.2 yards per carry, and he also amassed 10 touchdowns. Larry Leith, he's in the Hall of Fame, the GA Hall of Fame. He was a great all-around player. He led the team in rushing for 3 straight years from 1991 to 93. He led the team in receiving in 1993. He had 628 receiving yards in 1993. He's in the Hall of Fame. He also, this is one of the most amazing statistics and tells you how he got into the game in all different facets. But over the course of his GA career, he amassed 5,191 all-purpose yards, 2,128 rushing yards, 1,118 receiving, and 1,945 kick and punt return yards. He had 29 career touchdowns, and he's on the leaderboard for several of those similar statistics at Fordham University, where he went on to play college football. He was also a very good athlete in different sports, not just football. Four-sport athlete at GA, had over 1,000 career points on the basketball team. But that's really one of the great athletes in GA history. First one we're looking at here, first member again since 1991 to have an 1,000-yard rushing season. The next is Matt Blewett. He accomplished that actually two times. The first was in 1996, the second in 1997, back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons. In 1996, he had 1,340 yards, 16 total touchdowns. In 1997, he had 1,206 rushing yards. He led the team in rushing for 3 straight years from 1995 to 1997. So he had a great career at GA. Nathan Watchter was the next person to do it, and he did it immediately after Blewett graduated as a senior. So that gave GA 3 straight 1,000-yard rushing seasons. In 1998, Watchter had 192 carries, 1,210 total yards. Watchter is in the GA Hall of Fame, more so as a wrestler, but was a great football player. He actually won the state wrestling championship 5 times, and he's one of just 2 people to ever do that. He broke the state record for most wins in Pennsylvania history. Again, that's as a wrestler. But as we mentioned, his 1,000-yard rushing season gave GA 3 straight 1,000-yard rushers from 1996 to 1998. So from there, there's a bit of a jump to our next 1,000-yard rusher. That was Alex Holcomb, who accomplished it in 2005. In 2005 and 2006, he did it. In 2005, he had 1,059 yards on the ground, over 157 carries. In 2006, this is a school record, actually, for single-season rushing. He had 1,765 rushing yards, 23 rushing touchdowns. Not only does he hold the single-season record, but he actually holds the all-time rushing record in Germantown Academy history with over 3,800 career rushing yards. In addition to those records, he also holds a single-season record for carries with 329, rushing yards 1,765, and rushing touchdowns with 23. He's in the GA Hall of Fame for his contributions in not only football but also track. Again, he actually holds a GA record in track for the 60-meter hurdles, the sprint medley relay, and the discus as well. And he went on to play both football and track at Cornell University, another great athlete, and the all-time leading rusher in GA history, so there you go. The next 1,000-yard rusher, again, happened a year after Holcomb graduated. That was Reed Marco. He accomplished it in 2007. He rushed for 1,652 yards over 241 carries, 15 total touchdowns. That gave GA another instance of 3 straight 1,000-yard rushing seasons. And then down to our final 2 1,000-yard rushing seasons. The first came in 2014 when Isaiah Jones did it. He did it over 169 carries. And then finally, Trey Vance did it in 2018, just 2 years ago. He rushed for 1,103 total yards on the ground, over 186 carries, and 9 total touchdowns. So those are some of your top running backs in GA history, and you get a sense of some of their statistics. Again, there's obviously many, many more of them because it's such a historic team, but those are the records we've been able to find in statistics, Troy, that we've been able to find dating back to 1991. Now let's just move on to passing, look at some of the top passers and quarterbacks in GA football history. The first, we're starting with Coley Murphy again. He starts all the way back in 1991. He led Patriots in passing for 3 straight years from 1991 to 1993. The 93 season was his best as a quarterback at GA. He was, out of 203 attempts, he had 127 completions with a completion percentage of 62.6, passed for a total of 1,690 yards and 22 touchdowns. He's actually one of just 2 GA quarterbacks to have a completion percentage over 60 in a single season. The other is Jordan Longino, who's actually done that twice over the course of his career. He is the current GA quarterback. But Murphy actually holds the record for passes completed in a single season. Again, he did that in 1993 when he completed 127 of them. Moving on, our next quarterback is Sean Grieve. He actually led the team in passing for, again, 3 straight years from 2001 to 2003. He is in the GA Athletic Hall of Fame for both football and baseball. He had a great football career. He was a 2-time 1,000-yard passer in 2002 and 2003. In 2002, he actually set the school record for pass yards in the season with 1,821. That record has since been broken by Jordan Longino. But he actually went on to be drafted by the Philadelphia Phillies in the 2008 draft. At GA's senior season, had a great pitching and hitting season, but he was drafted by there. In terms of football, he's second all-time in career passing at GA. He finishes only behind Kyle McCloskey, and it's by about 90 yards. So you get a sense of how close that really is. Again, second all-time in single-season passing behind Jordan Longino, and he's second all-time in career passing touchdowns in GA history. Moving on, we're getting closer to the current year now, but we're moving up to Hayes Nolte, who had another great career at GA, led the team in passing from 2011 to 2013. In 2012, he had a really great year. 2013, excuse me. He helped lead an amazing comeback on GAPC Day. GA ended up winning that game 42-35, but that win gave GA its first football win over PC since 2000. So you get a sense of how important he was in that game. He had his best season his senior year. Went out of 225 attempts. He completed 120 of them for 1,728 yards. It comes out to a 53.3 completion percentage and 15 touchdowns. He actually went on to play tight end at Cornell University. Even though he was a quarterback, Jay went on to play tight end there. But after he graduated, our next passer stepped right in. That's Kyle McCloskey. He also led the team in passing for 3 straight years from 2014 to 2016. He's actually the only quarterback in GA history to pass for 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He did that in 14, 15, and 16, starting when he was a sophomore all the way through his senior year. And actually, that hasn't been done much in the Interac, again, dating back to 1991. But looking at those records, since 1991, only 2 quarterbacks in Interac history have accomplished that feat, again, passing for 1,000 yards in 3 straight seasons. The first is Michael Nakowski, who did it for Penn Charter. The second is Drew Gunther, who did it for Malvern Prep very recently. So those are the only 3 quarterbacks in Interac to accomplish that feat, again, dating back to 1991 and what records we have. But between Kyle McCloskey and Hayes Nolte, GA had 5 straight 1,000-yard passing seasons, which is the most during that any span. No one else has accomplished that. No 2 players have accomplished that. McCloskey, though, wasn't just a good passer. He was a good runner. He led the team in rushing in 2016, where he had 389 yards on the ground, 6 total rushing touchdowns. He's actually the only QB and player in GA history, GA football history, to lead the team in both rushing and passing. And he's the all-time leading passer in GA history. He also has the most passing touchdowns over the course of his career in GA history with 45. So those are some of your passers. Again, we'll touch on some of the current athletes like Jordan Longino and some of the records they've set and what they've done with GA football program next week. And there's a lot of them. This football team this year was immensely talented. But moving on to some of the wide receivers, we're actually going to look at Larry Leith again. We told you he was a 2-way threat. He led the team in receiving in 1993 at 628 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns. And while the 10 touchdowns may not seem like a lot, keep in mind, GA football typically only plays a 10-game season. So that means he scored a touchdown a game, averaged a touchdown a game. The 10 touchdowns is actually the most in a single season in terms of receiving in GA history. So he's the first kind of really notable GA receiver in terms of statistics. We fast forward up to the late 90s and early 2000s, and we get a look at Steve Holmes. He led the team in receiving in 1998 and 1999. In 1999, he had his best season when he had 47 receptions for 898 yards and 7 touchdowns. He actually holds the GA record for receiving yards in a single season with 898 yards, which he did in 1999. He's a member of the GA Hall of Fame for both lacrosse and football, and this is something really interesting about Stephen Holmes. He was the team's leading receiver for 2 straight years, but then they needed him to play quarterback in 2000, where he immediately transitioned to and had a good season. He had a somewhat low completion percentage of 44.8%, but he passed for over 1,000 yards. He had 8 touchdowns. That leaves him with over 2,580 career all-purpose yards. So a remarkable athlete who went from a very good receiver, a great receiver, to a very good quarterback as well. And one of the people he was passing to in 2000 was Chris Jordan, who's next on our list for receivers. He led the team in receiving just 1 year, but keep in mind he was playing with Steve Holmes, so he had some great seasons when Holmes led the team in receiving, but Chris Jordan led the team in 2000. He had 38 receptions for 103 yards. That's an average of 21.1 yards per reception, and then 4 total touchdowns. That yards per reception total, 21.1, is actually first in school history. Moving on, Tyler Yerk. He came just 2 years after Chris Jordan, had a very good year, 663 receiving yards in 2002, where he led the team in receiving. 8 total touchdowns for him. And then kind of getting closer to the current year here, Mike Riley led the team in receiving for 2 straight years. He had over 900 career receiving yards over his GA career. And again, the receiver leading the team in receiving the past 3 years has been Jerry Griffin Batchelor. He's set some records as well as Jordan Longino and Lacey Snowden, among several other players on the GA team now. But again, we're going to get into that on our next episode. So that's kind of concluding the timeline and some of the great accomplishments statistic-wise of several of the GA football players dating back to 1991. Again, we wish we had some more of the records about people before then, but that's what we're working with. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to detail some even more the great GA football players and coaches who are most of them in the GA Athletic Hall of Fame. So we're going to look at some of them. We're going to do a countdown, the top 10 games over the course of GA football history before Coach Stentz took over in 2012. And later, don't miss it, we're going to interview Jeff Decker and Michael Rand, 2 of the captains on Team 140 GA football. Don't want to miss that. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Around the Academy podcast, episode number 3, first team segment, starting with the football team. What we wanted to do now is, I know we just talked about several of the great players in GA football history, but why stop there? We have even more. A lot of these guys are in the Football Hall of Fame, the GA Hall of Fame, maybe not primarily for football, but for some other sports as well. These guys, maybe not as many statistics we know about them because they played longer ago, but still a lot of great facts about them, some really amazing accomplishments from these players and coaches. So let's jump right in. Let's start with Bill Armstrong, class of 1968. He's a member of the GA Football Hall of Fame, one of the many athletes at the time who played 4 sports. He played football, track and field, basketball, and baseball. In terms of football accomplishments, he was a 2-time All-Scholastic player in Philadelphia. He received the Maxwell Club Award for his outstanding play in the Interac. He was a second-team All-Interac selection in 1965, first-team selection in 1966 and 1967. He helped GA win the 1966 Interac title on the very last day with a 14-6 win over Penn Charter. And in that game, he rushed for 196 yards to help give GA the win, and he scored one of the 2 GA touchdowns. Moving on to Francis Reds Bagnall. He was a class of 1947. He is a very interesting, there's a lot of history around him. We'll tell you why in just a minute. But he played 3 sports, GA, football, basketball, and baseball. He went on to earn 9 varsity letters at the University of Pennsylvania. He was captain of the football team there. He received All-American honors. He finished third in the Heisman Trophy voting. One of the years there, he actually could have played in the NFL, but decided to enlist in the Navy, where he was a naval officer for 4 years. So that's props to him. Could have played in the NFL. He was actually drafted in the 11th round by the New York Giants in 1951. And you may be thinking, well, that's not possible because there's 7 rounds to an NFL draft. So he was actually undrafted. That's not the case, though, because interesting enough, there were 30 rounds in 1943, which is around the time he would have been drafted. He was drafted in the 50s, but that didn't go down until early on in the 60s when it went down to 20. So at the time when he was drafted, there were 30 rounds in the 1950s, and that's changed throughout history. Originally, it was only 9 rounds of football draft, then 20, then 30, then back down to 20, then 17, then 12, then 8, and all the way back down to 7, where we are today. But that's why he was drafted in the 11th round. I don't know why they needed 30 rounds. They're probably drafting water people too. But that's something interesting. He was drafted in the 11th round by the Giants. That was a fairly historic draft. We did some research. The Giants also had the first overall pick in that draft. The Eagles had the 8th. Obviously, it was a much smaller National Football League at the time. But you had several Hall of Famers taken in that draft. You had, let's see, 1, 2, 3. You had 8 total Hall of Famers taken in that draft. I'll list them all for you. Don't worry if you don't know them, because my father, who I listed some of these off to, didn't even know them. And probably because most of these guys are pretty darn old. But let's get into them. Y.A. Tittle, Dick Stanfill, Bill George, Mike McCormick, former Eagles coach, if you remember, Art Donovan, Jack Christensen. The great coach Don Shula was taken as a player in that draft, one of the greatest coaches in NFL history. And the final one was Andy Robustelli. So that's some history about the 1951 draft when Francis Bagnall was taken. He actually went on to be a stockbroker and was the president of an energy company, and was actually appointed to the American Battle Monuments Commission by President Ronald Reagan. So a lot of achievements around him, and that's not it. There was actually an award named after him called the Bagnall Award. It's presented annually to an individual for their contributions to the game of American football, so it's a very big award. It's presented by the Maxwell Football Club, and it's named after longtime club president and College Football Hall of Fame member Reds Bagnall. And there's some pretty big past award winners: Ron Jaworski, Lou Holtz, Dick Vermeil, Archie Manning, Don Shula. So that's a very big award. So Reds Bagnall, one of the many great alumnus, GA football alumnus and GA alumnus in general, accomplished a lot throughout his whole life. So there's some amazing statistics about him. But moving on, Daniel Brooks, another great GA football player, class of 1975. He was an All-Interact selection for 3 years, an All-City football selection for 3 years as well. He was inducted into the Philadelphia chapter of the High School Hall of Fame. He won the Geist Trophy and Maxwell Award at GA. He was also a very accomplished track player. Went on to be a 4-year starter at Duke. Moving on to Zachary Burwell. He was class of 1989. Over his career as a running back, he had 442 carries for 2,202 yards. In 1988, he had 209 carries for 1,252 yards. At the time, that was a school record, so he's yet another 1,000-yard rusher in GA history. In the 1988 game versus Episcopal, he had a total of 295 rushing yards in that game alone, and that's second all-time in GA history for a single game. 3 total touchdowns in that game, and he was a 2-time first-team All-Interact selection. Next up is Bernie Dallas, class of 1961. Played football in the Continental Football League for the Philadelphia Bulldogs. Signed briefly to play with the New York Giants, but tragically he was killed in a car accident a little while after he signed the deal with the Giants. So that was extremely unfortunate. But in terms of GA history, he helped GA win the Interact and GAPC Day in 1959 and 1960. He won the Geist Trophy on GAPC Day in 1959, helping GA beat Penn Charter, forcing a 3-way tie for the Interact title with both Penn Charter and Malvern Prep. And in 1960, his third quarter 15-yard touchdown run forced a 6-6 tie with Penn Charter, giving GA sole possession of the Interact title. So really helping GA in terms of success there. Moving on to Jim Fraser, class of 1955. Earned varsity letters for soccer, football, swimming, basketball, wrestling, track, and baseball at GA. So one of those amazing athletes among many, but he was a second-team All-Interact selection in 1953, first-team selection in 1954 for football. He attended the University of Wisconsin and was drafted by the Browns in 1959. Again, 30 rounds at the time. He was a 21st round pick. This is something interesting about him. The game of football has obviously evolved over hundreds of years, but he played both linebacker and punter for most of his NFL career and high school career as well. But played for the Denver Broncos, Kansas City Chiefs, and the Boston Patriots at the time, now the New England Patriots. He was a Pro Bowler in 1962, 1963, and 64. He was on the All-Madden team in 1964. He had several great seasons as a punter. He led the NFL in the longest punt of the 1962 season with a 75-yard punt. He also led the league in punt attempts, 81, punt yardage, 3,596 yards, and yards per punt, 44.4 in 1963. And in 1964, he led the league in yards per punt again with 44.3. And something interesting about Frazier, he is 7th all-time in NFL history in punts blocked, so that's not necessarily an endearing statistic or something you want to be at the top of the leaderboard in, but he is at the top of the NFL leaderboard in punts blocked, 7th all-time. Moving on, Dennis Kane, class of 1993. He was a two-time first-team All-Interact selection. He played varsity football at the Naval Academy, where he had some success there. Moving on to Eugene Leone, class of 1978. He competed in football, track and field, wrestling, and winter track while at GA 4 sports. He was an All-Interact selection in 1975, 1976, and 1977. Selected for both his accomplishments on the offensive and defensive line. He was also an All-Interact selection for wrestling and held the school record in the 120 high hurdles in terms of track and field. He's a world-renowned trap shooter. He competed nationally and internationally for the U.S. in trap shooting, won several different awards. He went on to play college football at UCLA. He helped them win the 1982 Pac-10 championship. He played. This is something very interesting. He played in the 1983 Rose Bowl championship game. He started at outside linebacker, and he received the defensive game ball for that game in a 1982 game, when they played John Elway in Stanford. He received the Defensive Player of the Game award. So interesting that he started against one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in John Elway. While he was at UCLA, Elway was at Stanford. Eugene Leone was at UCLA. But moving on, we have Frank Morala next, class of 1973. He was named All-Interact teams in 1971 and 1972, and he was later named to the Interact All-Decade team of the 1970s, and he went on to play football at the University of Delaware. Mark Norrie, class of 1992, is up next. All-Interact selection in 1990 and 1991. In 1991, he was named to the All-State team and selected to play in the Pennsylvania Big 33 All-Star Classic. He was awarded a full football scholarship to Boston College, where he went on to become a two-time All-Big East selection and winner of the Scanlon Award, which is the highest honor bestowed on a Boston College football player. And he went on to play in the NFL with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Was also a very accomplished pitcher on the baseball team at GA through 3 no-hitters in his time at GA on the baseball field. Moving on, Tyler Stampone, class of 2005. He played football, ice hockey, and baseball at GA. He was an All-Interact selection for football in 2003 and 2004. He helped GA win shares of the Interact in 2003 and 2004. He holds the school record. This is one of the few defensive statistics we've been able to find. But he holds the school record with 20 interceptions over the course of his football career. And he went on to have a fantastic college baseball career and even played a few seasons in the Baltimore Orioles organization. That's Major League Baseball. Frank Tamie, class of 1957. He was a first-team All-Interact selection in 1955 and 1956. He won the Maxwell Award, and he played football at Gettysburg. And he was named to the All-League teams twice while playing at Gettysburg. And then finally, we're going to conclude with Jim Turner, one of three Turners in the GA Hall of Fame. You talked about his father. Also, Michael Turner is the third Turner in the Hall of Fame. We mentioned Jim Turner's father was a legendary GA coach. Between football, baseball, wrestling, and winter track, Jim won 13 varsity letters. At GA, he was a member of the first team All-Interact every year of his high school career at linebacker. Was also a member, not many people have done that, by the way, but was also a member of the first team All-State and was named to the Interact and City All-Decade team, and he went on to be a 3-year starter at the University of Delaware. So definitely pretty long there. Sorry, we don't want to go on and on, but a lot of unique history surrounding some of those amazing football players and coaches who played at GA throughout their history, and they have several accomplishments throughout the athletic program, not just on the football team, but several other teams. So hopefully you found that somewhat interesting. Wanted to move on. Before we get to our interview, we had 2 more segments. The first is it's a special countdown we did. We're going to do one of these in our next GA football episode of games under Coach Dent's, but these are the top 10 games that we could come across that came before Coach Dent's took over in 2002, kind of throughout history. No particular order, but just starting. Number 1, it's the first GAPC Day. We talked about the history of GAPC Day, so if you didn't check that out, check out our last video on the history of GAPC Day. It came all the way back in 1887, and what more can you say than that football game was the start of the oldest continuous high school football rivalry in the country. We played it all the way up to now, from 1887 through 2 world wars, 2 pandemics, and that game just had a lot of importance because it kicked off that rivalry. Moving on, the same year, 1887, number 2, versus Episcopal in 1887, excuse me. It's number 2 on our list. The reason is because, obviously, football was a different game at the time, but in an 1887 contest versus Episcopal Academy, the GA football team put up 101 points against them. They won the game 101-0, but that's by far the most points ever scored in a single game in GA sports history, or at least football, in that win over Episcopal in 1887. Moving on, number 3 is the 2004 win versus Malvern. GA won that 21-20. That's actually their last win against Malvern Prep. Malvern Prep's really developed, especially recently, into a football powerhouse. The Interact League itself is a football powerhouse, but Malvern's won 9 of the last 15 Interact titles dating back to 2004, and that 21-20 was a great win against them, and the last time that GA's beaten them. But a great win there. Moving on to number 4 in 1903. We didn't find any specific games that we wanted to choose, but that 1903, you could choose every single game because, first off, it was an undefeated season for GA. And maybe the most amazing statistic about that season is that the GA football team that year didn't allow any touchdowns at all. They ended the season 11-0. There's not really any record of the games, but they only allowed 5 total points all season, the GA football team. That means they didn't allow a single touchdown. So that's an incredible statistic. On to number 5. It's the 1950 football game versus Penn Charter. It was a monumental upset on the final day. It created a tie for the Interact title. Haverford entered that day 0-8 overall, but they somehow found a way to defeat the visiting Episcopal Academy, which had won 14 consecutive league games and were poised to win sole possession of the Interact. Haverford won that game 14-6, but meanwhile, GA defeated PC 21-0 on touchdowns from Jim Kane and Fred Leach. Leach had a interception touchdown return, and because GA was able to defeat Penn Charter, Haverford defeated Episcopal. It created the tie for the Interact title between GA and Episcopal. and GA lost to Episcopal earlier in that season, so because they were able to beat Penn Charter and Haverford was able to defeat Episcopal, it created a tie for the Interac title. Again, 1952, that's up next. Number 6, that's another situation where you could pick any game of the season. It was another undefeated season. You could look at the last game against Penn Charter, which GA won 30-0. That's when Ed Lawless, as we mentioned, started coaching the team. With that win, the GA went 4-0 in the league and won their first outright title since 1908. Several touchdowns scored for GA over the win. Ed Lawless, as you mentioned, was the coach. He missed the 1951 season, actually, because he was serving in the Marine Corps as lieutenant in the Korean War, but he was back and helped lead GA to an undefeated season and an Interac title. Moving on, it's number 7. It's 1956, the game versus Penn Charter that season. That was a very wacky last week in the Interac. It produced 2 ties. GA tied Penn Charter 21-21 to earn the title, and then Haverford and Episcopal finished 13-13. That was the first tie in their 58 meetings. Episcopal and Haverford is a very historic rivalry as well, but it's got to be one of the only times in Interac history when on the same day 2 different teams, or really 4 total teams, but 2 different games end in a tie. Chick Downham scored 2 touchdowns for GA, and he had 3 interceptions, and Bob Sloan notched another touchdown, and that helped GA claim the Interac title. In 1973, another season in which you could really select any game, an undefeated season for GA, but especially looking at the games against Malvern and Penn Charter. GA won the title on the final day when they beat Penn Charter 30-6. Andy Hutter ran for 2 touchdowns. GA had 255 rushing yards on the ground. And the win versus Malvern was incredibly important because that was Malvern's only league loss, and they ended 3-1 in the Interac. GA finished first with 4-0. On to number 9, though. It's 2003 versus Malvern. We already talked about 2004 against them. But in 2003, the Interac title resulted in a triple tie for the first time since 1959. And it was with Malvern. They were one of the champions. They were 3-1 with a week remaining. And then the reason why GA didn't win it outright is because PC defeated them on the final week on GAPC Day. But had GA not defeated Malvern earlier in the season, they would not have tied with them for the Interac title. So even though they lost to Penn Charter they did not solely win the Interac, they tied for it. Their win against Malvern gave them at least a share of the title. But that was the first of 2 straight years, and we'll get into this on the next number 10 on the list. That was the first of 2 straight years where PC's win over GA forced a tri-championship. And that happened again in 2004. We're looking at the Episcopal game in 2004. It was the second straight year where there were 5 teams in the Interac at the time for football, and there were tri-champions for the second consecutive year. On the final weekend, Episcopal beat Haverford 37-7, and PC forced the triple tie by defeating GA, who had defeated Episcopal 13-12. That's what forced the tie for first place for the second straight year, but GA had defeated Episcopal earlier in that year, making sure it was at least a tie. The win against Episcopal secured GA at least a tie of the Interac title. So there you go. Those are some of the top 10 important games throughout GA's football history. Again, looking at it from before 2012, we're going to get into all things post-2012 and current state of the GA football team in our second episode about them coming up later. Now what we wanted to do is we figured before we get to our interview, we'd share some facts of the day. We have several facts for you. You may be wondering, how many times has GA won the Interac title? Well, they've won 24 times, first in 1887. Most recently in 2016, and everything in between. I mean, technically, Again, we're not sure what the Interac's doing with this. Technically, they won this year because they the best record of any team in the Interac. So you could just say it's 25 Interac wins. That's how I view it. In terms of Interac MVPs, we have the records dating back to 1969, but the Interac MVPs dating back to 1969 for GA. Paul Hutter, 1969, he was a quarterback. Tom Telford won it in 1976, he was a quarterback. Jim Turner in 1982 at linebacker. Michael Turner in 1990 at linebacker. Jim Slattery in 1999 for quarterback. Sean Grieve in 2003 at quarterback. Alex Holcomb in 2006 at running back. And most recently, Matt McGettigan in 2016 at the linebacker position. Again, we don't know what the Interac's going to do in terms of Interac MVP this year, but certainly several contenders for GA. And then our final few facts, GA, for those of you wondering, has an all-time record of 544, 499, and 59. It's the all-time football record. And an all-time lead record of 341, 297, and 32. That includes this year as well. And throughout history, we talked about this briefly with some of the top 10 games, but throughout the history of the Interac, there have been 16 times where there have been two teams that have tied for an Interac title, and 9 times when 3 teams have tied for an Interac title. Keep in mind, there's only 5 teams for most of the Interac history, so that's a lot of instances. 25 total times you've had teams 2 or 3 times tied for it. And then finally, our final fact of the day is that dating back to 1938, this gives you a sense of how important GAPC Day really is. It's often the final week of the season. But dating back to 1938, whether or not GA is going to win the Interac has been decided 20 times on the final week of the season. And that's just in GA history. So I bet you even more so the final week has determined whether or not other teams have won the Interac even more than 20 times. But it shows you just how competitive the Interac League as a football league has been, and then how important the final game is, and that's for GA and Penn Charter. It's typically always GAPCA. That's how important those games are. But those are your facts of the day. Hopefully you enjoyed those in our top 10 countdown in terms of football games before 2012. We're going to take a break here, but we've gotten to what you're all probably waiting for. That's the interview with 2020 football captains Jeff Decker and Mike Rowan. Don't go away. You're going to want to take a listen to that. That's coming up next on the Around the Academy podcast. All right, our guests today are both stud defensive ends, tight end and center for the Germantown Academy Patriots football team. One guest is a stud defensive end. He was first-team All-Interac selection last year. He's having a great year so far this year. The other, another stud defensive end, was rated as one of the best players in Pennsylvania by PennsylvaniaPennLive.com, and he is also having a great year this year. They are both captains for the GA football team, and we are thrilled to be joined by Jeff Decker and Mike Rowan. Guys, thanks for doing this. How are we doing?
It's great to be here.
It's great. Happy to be here.
Well, when I say stud defensive end, I'm not kidding. I mean, you guys probably should be playing for the Eagles. I know they could use you.
That's really funny.
That's funny.
Yeah.
You guys been keeping track of them so far this year?
Yeah, they have not looked good. Not looked pretty.
I stopped paying attention to them.
It's hard to continue to pay attention to them.
It really is.
It sure is. I know I wasn't watching this past Sunday when they lost to the Giants. But let's jump right in. Jeff, you play defensive end and center for GA. Mike, defensive end and tight end, both really good at both positions, as well as captains, as we just mentioned. You guys are in the midst of a 4-game season this year, and I want to know, how difficult has it been to only play 4 games this year?
It's definitely been tough, considering you're used to playing 10 games. You're used to having a lot of that time with your teammates, but you can't really get that back. And so it's definitely different, not having camp, stuff like that, not having the extra 6 weeks that we usually have to kind of be around the team and play some extra games.
Yeah, I agree. But, I mean, I think our team has handled it well, and we've come together for these last 4 games. So,
has it been more difficult as captains? Has it been more difficult to lead this year?
I feel like it has its own benefits, considering, you have to fight a virus as well, but it makes it a little bit easier to try and lead as best you can, knowing you only get 4 games. So it does have its pros and cons with it.
I mean, just watching you guys play, it is amazing. If you haven't watched these two play, you have to watch these two guys play. But I want to know, how do you guys get in the backfield so quickly all the time? I mean, it's amazing.
I don't know. I think it's probably hard to block both of us. So I mean, one of us is probably gonna be free.
Yeah, it's just part of our work that we get in throughout the weeks during practice and stuff like that.
Now, you guys, it seems like you both use your speed and quickness and your strength to get into the backfield, make tackles, make big plays. How important are both of those attributes and skills to your games?
I mean, power is definitely. I mean, you look at me and Mike. We're not pushing any like 250, 260 guy without strength, stuff like that. So you get those big tackles and stuff like that. You definitely need your strength, but you also need the speed to get around those guys and stuff like that. So it definitely both works.
And I don't know if I would say that I'm the best athlete, but I think it all just comes down to being a good football player and knowing the game.
So, what would you say the number one job of a defensive end is?
I mean, for starters, keep contained, keep things
Definitely keep contained
inside, because you will hear about it if you do not. So
yeah.
that's definitely a big thing to keep in mind.
And then got to get off the block too for runs. Make sure that you hold the blockers so they don't get up to the linebackers, so that we can open up for them to make plays.
For sure.
What do you think something people may not know about either defensive end or the other positions you guys play, center for Jeff and tight end for Mike?
Oh, that's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
I mean, I think a lot of times defensive end takes just a lot of people think a defensive end finds its biggest moments during the pass game, but I think a lot of the times we find our biggest moments during the run as well.
Yeah, I think even for I guess just linemen in general are underappreciated a lot. They do a lot of the dirty work. Every play they're getting hit. So give a lot of credit to any lineman.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, you guys, I read a lot of stuff that always gives credit to the skills positions as some of the best athletes around, but I think some of the guys who play the line like you guys are just as good, if not better, than some of those skill positions as athletes.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, we definitely have a lot of skill guys that can play pretty well, but I would not be far off the amount of skills we have on the offensive front and the defensive front, and I wouldn't look past that too much.
Who's someone you guys have modeled your game after, whether that's defensive, offensive?
I mean, defensively, I know what the whole group is Khalil Mack. We like to try and
Coach
picture
Dean,
his game, yeah.
Coach, every week, I don't know if you know this, but every week Coach Dean picks a Khalil Mack player of the week, in quotes. So, the best player that week, he gets a jersey, and he wears Khalil Mack's jersey for that week. So everyone's competing against each other to try to get it.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to play two very physically demanding positions?
I mean, it's tough. It has its moments, but at the same time, your adrenaline's rushing. You want to be on that field as much as you can to help your team out. So I definitely think you got to work for it, but you also got to love it too.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. I think you want to be out there. Me and Jeff, we don't want to come off the field at any time. So I think any time we get a chance to play either offense or defense, we're going to go 100% every time.
Now, Jeff, as the center, you have to make sure everyone's on the same page offensively, right?
Yeah, no, you definitely gotta have your different calls, your linebacker calls, your Mike calls, and stuff like that, and make sure everyone's kind of blocking the right person and stuff like that. So it's definitely a communication thing, but I think we work pretty well with it.
And Mike, this is something amazing I didn't know about you. I'm sure you know this, but did you know you have an 80-inch wingspan?
I did know that. Yeah, I have some pretty long arms.
You sure do. And something you mentioned, Khalil Mack. Something I don't know if I found this, but I came across it. Jadeveon Clowney, defensive end for the Titans, former first overall pick. He's got an 83-inch wingspan. He's about, I believe, 10 years your senior. So, and that was the largest in his draft class. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think Jadeveon Clowney's probably a lot better than me, but
Hey, Mike, I think you got a chance though. Keep working.
Yeah, but definitely use my length as an advantage, I'd say.
Now, you guys have played in a lot of games over not only your high school career, but your whole entire football career. To this point, what would you say your favorite or best game is that you've played in?
There's a lot of moments.
It's really a toss-up. I mean, even though I didn't play in that Episcopal game last year, I was hurt. Just being a part of that, just coming back, Nick kicked that field goal at the end. Jeff got that key pick.
Yeah,
that was amazing.
That's
to be
definitely a
part
special game. But you also look at that. I can look at that SCH game and see how far we were down, and then just kind of rally up the troops at halftime, and then get rid of a big 20, like I think it was 21-point deficit to kind of cut that and end up winning that game in dramatic fashion is a pretty cool one too.
And then, obviously beating PC on their own field last year, that was pretty special as well.
Yeah, a lot of good moments, especially when it comes to GA football.
What's the senior season been like this year? Any different than in years past?
I mean,
It's definitely different. I mean, there's a part of the game that has been lost, like the social aspect of going in the locker room after the games with your buddies, celebrating a win. But like I said earlier, I think we've done a good job just coming together as a team, making the best of what we've been given and taking advantage of the opportunities.
yeah.
How would you say the GA football program has helped you guys develop as players, athletes? How would you say it's helped?
I mean, I think it's helped tremendously because I mean, I think the work ethic here is second to none, and I think we like as a commanding group and the coaching staff and stuff like that, and the players like we work pretty well, and you start to learn how to work with one another and stuff like that, and you grow a bond. I think it's definitely set me up for a bright future.
What would you say, you guys both played defensive end, getting back to that, what would you say, we touched on this a little, but what would you say is the most underrated characteristic? It could be of a defensive end or just a football player in general.
I mean, being like, I think a lot of people, you watch the game, stuff like that, you're like, oh, you missed a tackle, or oh, you did this, and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people don't really realize how tough it is to, make a tackle or make a play and stuff like that. They're all just watchers. So, I mean, I think being a good tackler and being able to take down anyone that comes up and not be missed by like a move or something like that is definitely an underappreciated thing.
I think a big thing that a lot of people overlook too about football is that it's a huge mental game. Like it's one of the most physical sports out there, but you're also most of practice you're not really hitting each other. You're going over plays, going over what the other team's going to do. So I mean, there's a huge mental aspect of the game that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Mentioning the physicality, you guys play positions where you have to both tackle and block. Is that really difficult to do that?
I mean, I don't think it's too difficult. I mean, you're playing against a position, you know what you do. So like if you're playing against an offensive lineman, you know what he's going to try and do, and you play against a defensive lineman, and you know what he's going to try and do. And I think it has its way of benefiting you in some way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it helps out.
Looking at it from a defensive perspective, you guys have played against a lot of different players coming from offense. What would you say the most difficult type of offensive player is to play against, whether that's a quarterback, running back, wide receiver?
Phew, I don't know. I mean, I think a quarterback, especially that can make plays on his feet as well and get outside and make the first guy miss and get the ball out as quick as possible is something that can be tough because if you leave him outside or let him get around you, he's going to make plays, and that's going to really hurt you.
Especially as a D end when you're usually the one that's being keyed up on reads. They can, you have to stay back to make sure the quarterback doesn't pull out, and get across the edge. So I'd say a quarterback that can run is pretty hard to stop.
Yeah.
How did you guys first get interested in football?
I think my dad told me how to play it. That, this is a sport you're going to play. I played it and stuff like that, and it just grew on me.
Yeah, I think I probably had a similar experience, just my dad watching football games on television. I probably, saw it, asked him about it.
Exactly.
Started out playing flag, and then
I think it's just
I
couldn't tell you the time I actually started to enjoy it. I think it was just something that was kind of engraved in my head since day one.
So you guys have to do a lot to be at the top of your game. What's your favorite pregame routine, workout routine?
Pregame routine.
Well, I don't know if I necessarily have a routine, but I do like to stretch the morning before every game to make sure that I'm loose and ready to go.
Yeah, I know. I think for me that stretching is a big thing, but I also like listening to music and stuff like that and keeping your head just kind of level as can be and just staying focused on that one thing without any distractions.
I also need a good breakfast too.
Absolutely.
Some eggs, bacon.
So part of this, we asked some of our fans, if you will, for any questions they wanted to ask you guys. Our first question from our viewers is, what was it like playing alongside your father, Elijah Roten? Elijah Roten, for those of you who don't know, longtime GA Patriot, first team All-Interact selection. He's playing now at Duke University, and we hope he's doing well. He's wondering that.
I mean, Elijah, if you're listening, man, I mean, it was good and all, but I think if we ran it back 1-on-1, I think there'd be some mishaps on your end. That's all I gotta say. That's all.
No, but I mean, having Elijah as a teammate, especially when you're coming in as a freshman and sophomore, that was great to have as a mentor. You know, he taught you everything about what it was to play D line and O line, and you know, he got you better going up against him in practice. So, you know, having Elijah team, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Jeff, this next one is for you.
Oh
Question
my
is, do you think you'll hit your goal of benching 95 pounds by the time summer starts?
Nah, I mean, I've been stuck at like 85 for a couple weeks now, and I'm trying to make the push, hitting the protein, the creatine, but I'm not sure it's gonna get there in time. So
They're goofing on you.
I gotta keep working, though. I gotta keep working. We'll figure it out.
And finally, from our listeners, both of you obviously very good elite defensive ends. We're wondering who's the more elite defensive end.
Ugh, I don't know, man. It's
Yeah.
a toss-up. I think we're both. I think we're both different players.
I do. I think a lot of the time, Mike's good with his hands, good to getting his arms out, and then I'm good trying to use my finesse as best as I can. I think we have a way of having two different skills that benefit us in different ways.
I will say Jeff is probably the better pass rusher. You won't find a better pass rusher than Jeff Decker in the area.
And then for sure, I know Mike's good with his hands, stop the run pretty well. Because, I mean, doing the one-on-ones to easily get his arms out. So
Absolutely. So looking back at both your high school careers, what would you say stands out the most?
I don't know. I think probably just being with the team.
Yeah, I was
You know,
gonna say.
like in practice, even when you're not in, you're talking with all your friends. I think the social aspect of football is also it's a huge part. It's like where you meet your best friends for life. So
Yeah, no, I agree. The social aspect and kind of hanging with your guys basically every day of the week. You start to keep friendships that you never really get rid of in life. So I think that's the number one thing.
yeah, you don't realize how much time you actually are spending with these group of guys. So
What's something that maybe you've taken away from high school football and here just in general that you may apply, whether that's in college football or just in life moving forward?
I think the hard work ethic. I think that's something that like you got to earn it and you got to work to earn it. And I think that's something that you see on the football field all the time. But I also think that's something you're going to see when it comes to work and stuff like that.
yeah, I also think just being a teammate. In life you're always gonna like work with people that maybe you don't like, maybe you love, and then you just have to figure out a way to make things work. It probably came out wrong, but you know what I'm trying to get at.
Absolutely. So before we let you guys go, we wanted to play a quick game. It's called This or That. You guys, sure you know it. I'll give you, we've tailored it to kind of defensive end edition. We'll start out kind of with more general terms that are just kind of life stuff, and then we'll kind of narrow it down to football. So I'll give you two options, and you decide which one you would rather do. So we'll start out with TV shows or movies.
Sweet. Movies.
Yeah, all right, I'm with it.
Netflix or YouTube?
Ooh,
I think I got to go with YouTube.
I might go Netflix.
All right.
So narrowing it down to football, day game or night game?
Night game, definitely. Nothing like
night
a Friday night like game.
Grass or turf?
I mean,
I don't know how you can say grass.
yeah, I really don't. I think turf is nice.
Sack or pass deflection?
Sack for
Definitely
me.
sack.
Yeah.
Sack or pancake? This kind of includes both sides of the ball.
I'd probably say sack
Yeah, I
again.
think I'm still gonna say sack. Yeah.
Do you prefer run blocking or pass blocking?
Pass blocking.
I mean, for me, as a tight end, I'm not going to do a ton of pass blocking, so I'll probably say run blocking.
Would you rather tackle in the backfield or make a tackle downfield?
I think it's
Yeah, I think
tackle
in
in the backfield.
Yeah.
No one wants to go make a play downfield.
Tackle for a loss or big hit?
This one's interesting.
I'll take a big hit in the backfield.
Yeah,
for a tackle
you
for a
can't have
loss.
them both, Mike. I'll take the big hit. I think I'll take the big hit.
I'll take the tackle for loss.
Again, offensively, zone blocking or man blocking?
I don't know what you think, Jeff.
I don't know. Maybe man blocking because it's easier to kind of know who you're gonna block, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'll agree with him on that.
So would you rather tackle a fast running back or a big running back? And I guess that could be applied to quarterback or wide receiver. Fast or big? Would you rather tackle?
I mean, for me, I'm not very fast, so I think it's probably easier for me as a bigger person to tackle someone that's bigger rather than someone who's
Yeah, no, I
short
think I
and
agree with
fast.
that for sure.
Yeah.
Speed or strength?
Huh. That is a tough one for sure.
Speed kills.
Yeah, I'll
There's
take the speed too.
yeah.
Speed on the edge.
Very true. Pass heavy offense or run heavy offense? Which would you rather play against?
I think I'd rather.
I'd rather play against probably maybe a pass offense, but I'd probably, me being a player, would rather have a run heavy offense.
I'm gonna agree.
And finally, would you rather make the initial block or be the lead blocker?
I'd probably rather be the lead blocker.
Oh yeah.
Get a little recognition.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for doing this. Jeff Decker, Mike Rowan, they have a big game, their final game of their senior seasons in high school football career this Thursday against SCH. We want to congratulate both of you guys on all that you've accomplished throughout your high school career, and thanks for joining us here today on the Around the Academy podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you
for
having
sure.
me.
Welcome back to the Around the Academy podcast. We're back here to wrap things up. We wanted to again say thank you to Jeff Decker and Mike Moran, two of the captains on this year's GA football team, for taking the time to sit down and talk with us. And congratulations again to them on all they've achieved this year during the shortened season and throughout their high school football careers. So looking ahead to episode number 4 and episode number 2 in this football team segment. Again, this episode today was really more of just a history of the GA football team, some of the origin, how it started. So hopefully you learned something about the unique history about the team. But the next episode is going to be completely geared to the current GA football team and many of those players and what this season was like, the results. That's what next episode is going to be. So don't worry if you didn't learn anything about the GA football team this year in the past couple of years. That's what we're going to be doing on our next podcast episode number 4. It's going to feature 2 more GA football captains, Jerry Griffin-Batcher and Lacey Snowden. We're going to sit down with both of them and talk to them, so you have that to look forward to. Hopefully you're doing well. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Till episode number 4 next time. So long, everyone.